They arrested the old veteran for stolen valor until the general saw his tattoo and saluted.
"Sir, I need you to sit down right now." The voice of Officer Dennis Pollard cracked through the lobby of the Haverford Veterans Memorial Center like a starter's pistol, sharp and official, and laced with the unearned confidence of youth. He had his badge open, the leather wallet flipped forward, the way they'd trained him at the academy. Present the credential, establish authority, control the space. He was 29 years old, 6'2", and wore the certainty of a man who had never once been wrong about anything important enough to teach him otherwise. The old man on the bench did not sit down. He had been sitting. He had been sitting when Pollard arrived. He sat on the wooden bench near the entry doors with the stillness of something carved, his large weathered hands resting on his knees, a paper cup of coffee beside him that had long gone cold. His name was Earl Dean Calloway, and he was 81 years old. He wore a plain gray flannel shirt, faded jeans, and a canvas work jacket that smelled faintly of machine oil and old timber. On his left chest, pinned through the flannel, was a row of military service ribbons. On his wrist, at the end of one of those steady, map-worked hands, a tattoo emerged from beneath the cuff of the jacket, just the upper arc of it visible. Dark ink against sun-weathered skin, old enough to have blurred slightly at the edges, the way a photograph blurs when left too long in the light. Officer Pollard had received the call 40 minutes ago. Someone at the center had reported a suspicious individual claiming military service, wearing decorations that didn't look right, asking to use the private veterans' conference room. In this town, in the past 2 years, there had been 3 incidents of civilians faking military credentials for benefits access. Pollard had handled one of them himself. He knew what stolen valor looked like. He was fairly certain he was looking at it now. "Sir," he said again, louder, because the old man was still not reacting. "I need to see identification and any documentation you have supporting those decorations." Earl Calloway's eyes moved up slowly. They were gray, the color of a winter sky heavy with rain, and they possessed a depth that was difficult to look into directly. The way you couldn't stare too long into very deep water without feeling something shift in your chest. He reached slowly into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced a worn leather wallet, the kind a man carries for 30 years without replacing, because it does the job. He held it out. His hand was perfectly steady. Pollard took it, opened it, found a veteran's ID card. He turned it over, read the name. Earl D. Calloway, looked at the photograph. It was old, not recent, because this was an older card, and the photograph showed a face that might have been this man's but 30 years ago. He frowned. "This expired," he said. "It doesn't expire," Earl said. His voice was a low rumble, each word placed with the economy of a man accustomed to being heard in important silence. Check the lower right corner. Pollard looked. There was no expiration date field. He looked again. Nothing. He turned it over. Looked at the edge. He frowned deeper. In his experience, all ID cards expired. He pocketed the wallet and spoke into his radio, calling for a check on the name and SN. Then he looked at the ribbons. There were 7 of them. He didn't know ribbons well. He knew the American flag patch and the word Army on a shoulder and a generic combat deployment badge. He didn't know ribbons. But there was one on this man's chest that he had seen before, only once, in a photograph behind glass at the courthouse. A blue bar with a white star in the center, hanging from a light blue ribbon. He squinted. "Are you seriously telling me that's?" "It was given to me," Earl said. "A long time ago." A small gathering had formed. The visitors' lobby of the Veterans Memorial Center was not a large space. A cream-painted room with a reception desk, 3 wooden benches, a bulletin board thick with event flyers and obituaries. A receptionist named Tamara Okafor stood behind her desk with her hands pressed together at her lips, watching. Two men who had come for the morning coffee program, both in their 70s, both with their own ribbons, stood near the coffee station, watching. An elderly woman with a cane near the door watched. They all felt something they could not name yet. Something in the quality of the old man's stillness. Something in the way the officer was filling more space than the situation required. Pollard moved closer. He was performing now. The audience had assembled, and something in him found its rhythm in front of them. "Sir, I've seen this before. People who wear decorations they didn't earn. It's a federal offense. Do you understand that? Stolen valor. You're looking at criminal charges if these ribbons aren't legitimate." He reached forward and touched the row of ribbons, his finger pressing against the blue ribbon and its white star. "Especially this one. Do you have any idea what this represents? Do you understand that if you didn't earn this, you are committing a federal crime in front of a police officer right now?" The room had gone very quiet. Earl Calloway looked at the officer's hand on the ribbon. He looked at it for a long moment, the way a man looks at something that has crossed a line he didn't draw but has always known was there. His jaw did not tighten. His hand did not clench. He simply looked at Pollard's finger resting against the blue fabric, and something in his expression moved, and the lobby dissolved. Not the lobby of the Veterans Memorial Center in Haverford, Pennsylvania, in the third week of October. Not the cream-painted walls or the bulletin board or Tamara Okafor's folded hands. The smell changed first. The clean industrial smell of the center replaced by the smell of blood and mud and burning vegetation, and the particular sharp, copper-sweet odor of a man dying beside you in the rain. The light changed. The fluorescent brightness of the lobby gave way to the charcoal, filtered light of a jungle breaking into a clearing. The sky so overloaded with cloud that there was no shadow, just a flat gray luminosity that made everything look like the world had run out of color. Vietnam, February 1968. 7 kilometers northwest of Hue. The Tet Offensive had been running for 21 days and had converted what had been a conventional war into something else entirely. A war of sudden corners, of cities turned inside out, of a structure made of certainties collapsing. Earl was 22. He was a combat medic attached to the 1st Cavalry Division, Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, and he was applying direct pressure to a wound in the chest of a man named First Lieutenant Thomas Graves, his company commander, who had taken a round through the shoulder and another through the left lung, and was breathing in the rhythm of a man trying very hard not to stop breathing. "You need to move," Graves said to him. The lieutenant's voice was wet. "Earl, you need to move." "They're coming back." "Shut up, sir," Earl said. Softly, the way you tell a man to shut up when you love him. Around him, the rest of the squad had either moved to defensive positions or were down. 2 men down meant dead. 3 positions meant the ones still moving were holding a perimeter the size of a large room around the 2 of them, Graves dying in the mud and Earl refusing to move. It was not tactically sound. Sergeant Miller, 15 meters away behind a collapsed wall, screamed at him to fall back. Earl did not fall back. He had entered the clearing through the north because that was the only way, and the only way back was through the north, and the north was where the sound of boots in mud was getting louder. He had his weapon. He had his medical kit. He had exactly one hand free, and it was occupied keeping pressure on a hole in a man's chest. He made a calculation that was not a calculation. It was a fact, presented clearly, without room for argument. He was not leaving. What happened in the next 14 minutes, historians and military reviewers would later describe as a sustained action under overwhelming fire. What Earl remembered was narrower. He remembered Graves's hand on his wrist, cold from blood loss, tightening. He remembered the sound his own voice made saying something reassuring and probably false. He remembered the weight of the perimeter shrinking and the sound of the extraction helicopter before he heard it rationally, the way the body registers what it needs before the mind confirms it. He dragged Graves 40 meters through mud that tried to swallow them both. He did not drop the rifle. He did not stop applying pressure. He got Graves to the helicopter. Graves lived. 4 other wounded men lived that day because of what Earl did in those 14 minutes. A fact that was written in official documents and confirmed by 3 eyewitnesses and later by Graves himself, who stood at a ceremony in April of 1969 and pressed a blue ribbon with a white star into Earl Calloway's palm and told him in front of a room full of brass that he was the bravest man he had ever seen. The memory vanished. The lobby solidified. The fluorescent lights came back. Tamara Okafor's hands were still pressed together at her lips. Officer Pollard was still talking. Something about documentation. Something about a more thorough examination. His radio crackled with a response to his ID check that was coming back with a confused delay. The system was having trouble with the old record format, and while he waited, he was laying out the case to the room, to his audience, to the 2 older men near the coffee station who had both gone very still and very pale. It was one of those men, a former Army chaplain named Reverend Gerald Price, 77 years old, who had served in Korea and who had spent 30 years learning to recognize what made certain men different, who quietly left the coffee station. He walked to the reception desk and spoke in a low voice to Tamara. She looked at him. Then she looked at the old man on the bench. Then she picked up the phone. She did not call security. She called the administrative director, who called the regional VA coordinator, who had the phone number because she had been told years ago to keep it and to use it only if it was necessary. The VA coordinator dialed. The phone rang twice. A colonel answered. "I need you to understand something," the coordinator said. "There is a police officer at the Haverford Veterans Memorial Center arresting a man for stolen valor. His name is Earl Dean Calloway." The silence that followed stretched for 4 full seconds. It was the kind of silence that follows a name spoken in a room where it means something permanent and serious and large. When the colonel's voice returned, it was stripped of everything except urgency. It was tight. It was focused. "Say the name again." She said it again. "What is the officer's name?" She told him. "Get to Officer Pollard right now and tell him to stand down. I am in the car in 60 seconds. Do not let anyone touch that man. Do not let anyone remove those ribbons. Do you hear me? Do not let anyone touch Earl Calloway." He was already standing. His chair spun behind him. His aide looked up, and the colonel said, "Get me to Haverford," and the aide was already reaching for the keys. At the base 30 miles north, the call hit 3 offices in under 4 minutes. A brigadier general was looking at a procurement spreadsheet when his aide walked in with a face that made him put the spreadsheet down immediately. A command sergeant major who had served with the 1st Cavalry in the 80s knew the name, because everyone who had served with the 1st Cavalry in the 80s knew the name. He stood up from his desk and told his assistant he was leaving and did not explain where. The master sergeant who drove the general's vehicle later said that the general had not spoken during the entire drive. He had simply sat in the back with his jaw set and his eyes forward, and the expression of a man who understood exactly what was happening and had no patience for the time it was taking to correct it. Back in the lobby, Pollard had made a decision. The ID check had come back incomplete, old record structure, partial match, no full confirmation, and in the absence of a confirmed match. Protocol suggested he move the individual to a temporary holding situation pending full document review. He stood in front of Earl Calloway and said, "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me. This is not an arrest, it's a—" He stopped. Because Tamara was coming across the lobby, moving faster than anyone had seen the 70-year-old woman with the comfortable shoes move before. She put her hand on Pollard's arm. She said, "You need to stop what you're doing right now." Her voice was not loud. It carried everything anyway. Pollard opened his mouth. The lobby door opened. They came in quickly, and without ceremony, the colonel first, uniform precise, eyes sweeping the room and landing immediately on the old man on the bench, with the quiet diagnostic speed of a man who has spent a career looking for what matters in a room. Behind him, the command sergeant major. Behind him, two others in uniform whose rank insignia made Officer Pollard's throat go dry without his understanding why. And then the general. Not large, not physically imposing, a compact man in his late 50s with silver at his temples and the bearing of a man who had long since stopped needing to perform authority because he simply possessed it. The general did not look at Pollard. He did not look at the ribbons or the lobby or Tamara or the two older men near the coffee station. He looked at Earl Calloway, and something moved across his face that was not easily categorized. It was recognition and reverence, and something close to grief, the expression of a man seeing something he had feared he might never see again. He crossed the lobby. He stood before the old man on the bench. And then Brigadier General Marcus Holloway, United States Army, with 29 years of service and 4 combat deployments and a chest full of his own decorations, raised his hand to the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise salute that anyone in that lobby had ever witnessed. Directed at a man in a gray flannel shirt and worn canvas jacket. Directed at a man a police officer had been preparing to arrest. The gasp moved through the room like a single breath drawn by everyone simultaneously. The two older men near the coffee station went rigid. Tamara Okafor pressed both hands over her mouth. Officer Dennis Pollard's hand, still extended toward Earl, went slowly to his side. The color left his face in stages. The general held the salute. Earl Calloway looked up at him with those gray eyes, deep as cold water, and then slowly, with the deliberate dignity of a man who had never rushed anything in his life, rose from the bench and returned it. The general lowered his hand. He turned. For the first time since entering the room, he looked at Officer Pollard. His voice was very quiet and absolutely controlled. "Colonel," he said, without looking away from Pollard. The colonel stepped forward. He opened a folder he had carried in. His voice was clear and formal and carried the weight of everything the lobby needed to understand. Earl Dean Calloway, Sergeant First Class, United States Army, 1st Cavalry Division. 3 tours of service. Vietnam 1967 through 1971. Awarded the Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star with Valor. Silver Star. Distinguished Service Cross. The colonel paused. And recipient of the Medal of Honor presented April 14, 1969 for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his own life above and beyond the call of duty during the Tet Offensive in the Republic of Vietnam, for sustaining direct fire from enemy forces while providing medical care and evacuation to 5 wounded soldiers, including his commanding officer, refusing to abandon the position until all were removed to safety. The colonel looked up from the folder and at the lobby. At the older men. At Tamara. At Officer Pollard. "That ribbon your officer dismissed as potentially fraudulent is the Medal of Honor." The colonel's voice did not change in volume or tone. It did not need to. The nation's highest military decoration. There are fewer than 60 living recipients. He paused again. "Mr. Calloway is one of them." He lowered the folder. The silence in the lobby was deafening and absolute. The general turned to Pollard and said, "You are going to provide a full written report of this encounter to your department commander and to my office. Your department will be conducting a mandatory review of protocols for interactions with decorated veterans. That will begin this week. He looked at Pollard without anger, without the contempt Pollard might have expected, might have felt he deserved. There was something worse in the general's eyes. There was disappointment. The kind that comes from a man who has seen what human beings are capable of, at their greatest and at their worst, and who has never found a way to make peace with the distance between the two. A representative from the department's review board arrived within the hour. Pollard was suspended with pay pending review. The subsequent investigation found failures of training, of protocol, and of judgment. He was reassigned and required to complete a full military heritage and veteran services course before returning to active duty. The department issued a public statement. It was the kind of statement that arrives too late, but still matters. 2 months after that morning, Officer Dennis Pollard drove to the Veterans Memorial Center on a Thursday afternoon. He was not in uniform. He wore plain clothes, jeans and a dark jacket, and he had lost some of the broadness in his shoulders, the way a man deflates slightly when certainty leaves him. He sat in the lobby for 10 minutes before Tamara told him that Mr. Calloway came in on Thursday mornings, not afternoons, but that she would pass a message. The message found Earl at a diner 3 blocks away, where he had coffee most mornings with 2 men his age whose names he'd known for 30 years. When Pollard walked in and saw him, small in the diner booth, the canvas jacket, the gray flannel, the hands wrapped around a mug, he stopped in the doorway for a moment. Then he crossed the room and stood at the edge of the table. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I came to apologize. For what I did, for what I said. He stopped, started again. I didn't know what I was looking at. I should have been more careful. I should have asked questions before I made assumptions. And I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry." Earl Calloway looked at him for a long moment, those gray eyes, deep and still, reading him the way a man reads conditions, not the surface, but what lay beneath. Then he slid the coffee menu across the table with one steady hand and moved a fraction to the right on the bench. "Sit down," he said. "Coffee's good here." Pollard sat. His shoulders dropped. Something in him that had been braced for weeks released in one quiet moment, in a corner booth of a diner across a table from a man he had wronged and who had offered him a seat anyway. Earl lifted his mug and said, "I spent 40 years watching people look right through things they didn't understand. Medals, calluses, old scars. Looking without seeing. It's not a crime to not know. The crime would be if you decided not to learn." He set the mug down. Outside, the autumn light fell across the street in long bars. You learned. He left first, pulling on his canvas jacket, the ribbon bar on his chest catching a single bar of sunlight as he turned toward the door. Pollard watched him go, unhurried, unperformed, simply himself, moving back into the ordinary world with the ease of a man who had never needed it to know his name. The diner went on around him. The coffee went on being poured. No one turned to watch. No one knew. But that is the nature of the men who walk quietly among us. They carry their history in worn jacket fabric and steady hands and eyes like deep winter water, and they do not ask to be seen. They only ask, in the end, that we learn how to look. If you were moved by Earl's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.